Imagine coming home to find strangers treating your property like a public highway. That's exactly what happened when an entire HOA decided my land was their personal shortcut. But when I fought back, they called the cops. This is the wild story of how a Karen with a God complex tried to bully me into submission, and why she'll never underestimate a homeowner with a fence ever again. I bought this house for peace and privacy. It sits on a generous stretch of land, a quiet slice of paradise I'd scrimped and saved to finally call my own. For the first few weeks, everything was bliss. I'd wake up to the sound of birds instead of blaring car horns, and go to bed listening to nothing but the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But within weeks, I realized my quiet haven had turned into a battleground. A narrow strip of my property connected to the edge of an HOA-managed neighborhood, a detail I initially shrugged off. I assumed no one would care about a dirt path that wasn't even paved. But then, little by little, cars began creeping onto my land, headlights sweeping across my bedroom windows at odd hours of the day and night. Every morning it felt like rush hour in my backyard. Tires tore up the grass, and drivers glared through their windshields as if I were in the wrong for standing on my own property. The HOA's response? A collective shrug as if to say, not our problem. But when a joyrider destroyed my lawn one morning, spinning out and leaving deep ruts in the soil, I declared war. Let me back up for a moment and explain how all this started. When I first moved in, I noticed a well-worn path on that narrow strip of land. It looked more like hard-packed dirt than a true road. The previous owners hadn't mentioned it, so I assumed it might have been an old service route for utilities or maybe a way they used to bring heavy equipment in and out. No big deal, I thought. But what seemed like a benign path soon revealed itself to be a clandestine public thoroughfare for the HOA next door. Cars began rolling through with increasing frequency. It was as if the word had spread, "Hey everyone, there's a shortcut here, knock 10 minutes off your commute." Before I knew it, my yard was being treated like the on-ramp to a freeway. At first, I attempted a friendly wave, or a polite word to the drivers, thinking they might not realize they were on private property. Most of them either ignored me or waved back as if everything was perfectly normal. A handful of them even looked annoyed, almost offended that I was there, standing in my own yard, interrupting their precious shortcut. I tried calling the HOA, thinking they would want to put a stop to this. After all, who wants random cars tearing through private land to reach their neighborhood? Surely that wasn't in anyone's best interest. But the HOA representative was borderline dismissive. Since that strip isn't part of our jurisdiction, they told me, there's really nothing we can do. Translation? Not our problem. Good luck. That's when I made my choice. If the HOA wouldn't help me, I'd help myself. I hired a contractor and put up a sturdy fence and a locked gate right where the dirt path met my property line. I also mounted several no trespassing signs, making it painfully obvious that this was private land. I was hoping people would see the fence and sign and realize, oh, maybe this isn't a road I'm entitled to use. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The fence went up on a Friday. By the following Saturday afternoon, I heard incessant honking near my gate. Stepping outside, I saw a single car parked up against the newly installed barrier. The driver had one hand on the horn, the other on her phone, furiously tapping away. This was my first meeting with the infamous Karen. There she was, perfectly highlighted hair, phone in one hand, finger jabbing the air. "Open this gate," she screamed the moment she saw me. I froze, trying to process what I was looking at. This wasn't just some lost driver. This was the HOA's attack dog, and I was her chew toy. "You have no right to block this road," she barked, marching toward me as if she owned my property. "I'm already late and I need to get through." I blinked at her, trying to keep my composure. "I'm sorry," I said, "but this is private land. You're trespassing. I've posted signs. This isn't a public road." Karen's face twisted in outrage. "Don't lecture me. I'm on the HOA board. We've been using this access point for years. You can't just fence it off. Open it. Now." That's when I realized two things. First, Karen was clearly used to barking orders and having everyone jump to obey. Second, she had no concept of property lines or private ownership when it came to satisfying her own convenience. What Karen didn't know, I'd spent nights poring over property maps, recording every trespass, building a case tighter than her HOA's bylaws. When she whipped out her phone yet again, I half expected her to call some higher power in the HOA. But she went one step further and dialed the police, right there, in my driveway. It would be amusing if it weren't so infuriating. Karen had the nerve to call 911 on me, the rightful owner, claiming that I was blocking a public road. The gall. Still, I waited calmly for the police to arrive, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and annoyance. This was my land, I wasn't the criminal here. Sure enough, 2 officers showed up. The first approached me, looking thoroughly confused. "We got a report about someone blocking the road," he said, glancing at the closed gate. I handed him the property documents. "Actually, officer, this is my private property. These folks have been using it as a shortcut without my permission. I put up a fence to stop trespassers. I have the paperwork that confirms this land belongs to me." He studied the papers, then looked over at Karen, who was still standing by her car, arms crossed. "Okay, so there's no public easement here?" he asked. "None," I confirmed. "I checked with the township before I bought the place. No easement, no public right-of-way. It's just a strip of private land that unfortunately lines up with their neighborhood." The officer nodded. "All right, let me talk to the other party." Karen's shrill voice carried over to my side of the yard. "Do you know who I am? I'm on the HOA board, and this man is illegally blocking our road. We've been using it for years." I watched as the officer calmly explained to her that years of usage did not magically transform private property into a public road. Karen's face turned a concerning shade of red. She flailed her arms and pointed repeatedly at my fence, but it was obvious the officer wasn't buying it. Eventually, the second officer joined in, echoing his partner. "Ma'am, this is private property. We can't compel him to open the gate. If you continue to trespass, he's within his rights to press charges." This was the first major blow to Karen's ego. She whipped around, gave me a death glare, and hissed, "This isn't over. The HOA will come after you. You'll regret it." Then she stormed off, squealing her tires as she jerked the car around and sped away. I watched her go, half relieved and half amazed that she'd thought the police would take her side. In the days that followed, the traffic through my property ceased. My fence and gate had done the trick. No one dared cross my no trespassing signs anymore. I could finally sleep at night without the glare of headlights. But something in my gut told me this was just round 1. Karen's parting words, her promise that the HOA would come after me, echoed in my mind. From what I'd heard about overzealous HOA boards, they could be relentless. And Karen was clearly used to getting her way. Sure enough, about a week later, I got a letter from the HOA. At first glance, it looked official enough to make me worry. In stiff legal language, they insisted I remove the newly constructed fence because it was blocking a long-standing access route used by the community. Their complaint also hinted at some mythical easement that gave them the right to cross my land. I laughed out loud when I read it. They were referencing the same non-existent easement Karen had babbled about to the cops. I still had the same property map and county records that proved there was no such thing. The nerve of these people. Did they really think I'd cave to a letter full of baseless threats? I decided to attend their requested meeting just to set the record straight. Walking into the HOA office felt like stepping into hostile territory. A long table stretched across the room, lined with board members who stared at me as if I were an enemy combatant. Karen, naturally, sat near the head of the table, arms crossed and glaring daggers. The board president cleared his throat and introduced me to everyone, explaining the situation in a tone that suggested I was the cause of a major neighborhood crisis. "This homeowner," he began, "has constructed a fence on what many in our community consider a vital access point." Karen jumped in. "He's made our lives miserable, forcing us to use the main road. It's added several minutes to everyone's We've been utilizing that shortcut for years without incident." I listened, marveling at how casual they were about using my property. The sense of entitlement was astounding. They spoke as though they genuinely believed they had some moral, if not legal, claim over that strip of dirt, simply because they'd been taking advantage of it for so long. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and placed copies of my property documents on the table. "I understand your concerns," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but the reality is, this land is privately owned by me. There is no public road here, no easement, and certainly no legal right for anyone to use it as a shortcut. I've had people tearing up my lawn, ignoring my presence, and even calling the cops on me for defending my property. I'm sorry if it's inconvenient, but you have no authority over land you don't own." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. One or two of them even nodded, perhaps recognizing the legality of my stance. Karen, on the other hand, was livid. "This is absurd," she snapped. "A piece of paper saying you own it doesn't change the fact that we've used it forever. You're the one causing a disturbance." Another board member tried to interject. "Karen, maybe we need to reconsider. If the records show it's his property, we can't really," she cut him off. No, we are not dropping this. He's trampling on our community's rights. Inside, I wanted to laugh. Community's rights? The irony was too rich. Eventually, the board president ended the meeting by saying they would consult with their attorney. I went home feeling I'd made my position clear. Was this the end of it? I doubted it. Karen's outrage looked too personal for her to just let it go. Over the next few weeks, I received several more letters. Each one was more insistent than the last, demanding I restore access and remove the fence or face further action. Still, none of them contained any actual legal grounds, just vague references to community standards and long-standing usage. It was bullying, plain and simple, but I wasn't budging. Then came the moment I'd anticipated. My own lawyer called, informing me that Karen had engaged legal counsel. She was planning to sue, claiming there was an implied easement that allowed her HOA neighbors to cross my property. She might as well have claimed ownership of my living room while she was at it. My attorney assured me that her case was flimsy at best. Implied easements typically require a strong legal precedent, not just years of convenience. Still, the thought of going to court over this was stressful. Lawsuits can drag out for ages, draining both time and money. As if dealing with Karen's theatrics wasn't enough, I now had to worry about legal fees. But here's what Karen didn't know. While she was busy ranting about her rights, I'd been quietly documenting every incident, every trespass, every car caught on my security cameras, every letter from the HOA. I had property maps from the county, official documents with my name emblazoned on them, and even video footage of Karen screaming at me to open the gate. My lawyer had everything neatly organized. If Karen wanted to go to court, we had a case that was tighter than the strictest HOA bylaws she could quote. I also had a secret weapon, the local news. One of our nearby stations loved covering HOA horror stories. A friend suggested I reach out and share what was happening. I'd read enough about HOAs using intimidation tactics to think, why not shine a little public spotlight on this? So I sent an email to the station, attaching some documentation and a brief summary of Karen's meltdown. To my surprise, they jumped on the story. They wanted an on-camera interview, something that would put Karen's behavior and the HOA's overreach under scrutiny. They brought lawyers, I brought cameras. When the local news aired footage of Karen's meltdown, complete with her ear-splitting screams and the moment she called the police on me, suddenly, that public road magically disappeared from the HOA meeting minutes. The impact was immediate. Neighbors started talking. People who had once shrugged off the shortcut realized they had been trespassing. Some neighbors even wrote me apology notes, admitting they hadn't realized how harmful it was. Others who had been blindly backing Karen began distancing themselves from her. After all, it's one thing to privately suspect your board member is out of line. It's another to see her rant and rage on the nightly news. A few days after the story aired, the HOA officially contacted me, this time with a very different tone. Gone was the aggressive posturing. Instead, they politely stated they were reviewing the circumstances and would revisit any previous claims made by our board members. I nearly laughed out loud reading it. They were backpedaling so fast they might have set a land speed record. And then, unbelievably, Karen herself called me. The woman who had threatened, yelled, and summoned the police to force me to open my gate was suddenly contrite. I saw the news piece, she said, her voice subdued. I realize I may have overreacted. She claimed other neighbors had confronted her, furious that she'd made the entire HOA look bad. Apparently, she had never expected her private tantrum to become a public fiasco. You have to understand, she murmured. We've just always used that path. It felt like it belonged to us. I didn't think about the legalities. I appreciated the gesture somewhat. But, let's be real, her regret seemed more about her embarrassment than my inconvenience. She apologized anyway, saying she would respect my property rights going forward. My lawyer soon informed me that Karen was no longer pursuing any lawsuit. I suspect they realized they had no case, he told me. Plus, that video is about the worst possible evidence against them. The final nail in the coffin arrived in the form of an official HOA letter, delivered a couple of weeks after Karen's call. This time they flat out apologized. They acknowledged that their board member Karen had overstepped her bounds, and they confirmed that the HOA would not, under any circumstance, pursue action against me for the fence. They even included a gentle reminder to all residents that private property must be respected, a 180-degree turn from their earlier demands. Buried in the letter was a brief mention that Karen had voluntarily stepped down from her position on the board. Whether she was forced out or truly chose to leave, I'll never know. The fact that it happened right after the news segment aired is telling. I kept that letter as a memento, a tangible symbol of standing up for my rights and winning. It's amazing how a simple strip of land can reveal so much about entitlement and power dynamics. What started as a few cars taking a shortcut blew up into a legal standoff, complete with threats, board meetings, and a dramatic police. The whole ordeal taught me that some people will exploit any perceived weakness. If you don't stand firm, they'll trample all over you without a second thought. Would the HOA really sue over a strip of dirt? Oh, they tried. And they might have kept going if I hadn't gathered my evidence, fortified my property, and taken my story public. Turns out, Karen's authority stopped where my property began. Every so often, I still think back to that morning I first saw a car spin out and tear up my yard. At the time, it felt like a minor annoyance. But in hindsight, it was the opening salvo in what became an all-out war for property rights. I'm just grateful I had the resources and determination to stand my ground. Nowadays, my fence stands taller than Karen's ego ever did. And every time I lock the gate, that click sounds like freedom. The shortcut is gone, the trespassers have moved on, and peace has returned to my little corner of the world. In the end, I gained more than I lost. Not only did I protect my property from an overreaching HOA, but I also learned the power of asserting my rights and refusing to be intimidated. Karen and the rest of the board discovered that "we've always done it this way" isn't a valid legal argument, especially not when it comes to private land. As for the neighborhood, they still have their main road, which is exactly where they should be driving. They can glare as they pass by, but none of them dare cross my fence line again. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, where people treat your property like it's theirs, and an HOA tries to bully you, take this story to heart. Document everything, consult a lawyer, and don't shy away from shining a spotlight on their actions. Because sometimes all it takes is a single fence, a few no trespassing signs, and a little determination to remind everyone where the real boundaries lie. And if a Karen comes honking at your gate, phone in hand, finger jabbing the air, demanding you bend to her will, just remember, the law is on the side of the rightful owner. No amount of self-importance can change that. Now, that gate remains, a steel and wood testament to the lengths someone will go to protect what's theirs. And with every firm click of the lock, I'm reminded that standing up for yourself is never a mistake. The shortcut is closed for good, and my privacy is finally secure. As for Karen, I suspect she won't be underestimating any homeowner with a fence ever again.